Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larsen. This is episode 1 of a new mini-series on the show we're calling Longevity for Investors. I'm lucky enough to be joined by Greg Bailey, who you're going to hear all about. Greg is going to be co-hosting this series with me. And why don't we start it off with, Greg, we're going to have you as guest number 1. And then for the rest of the series, you're going to be co-hosting with me. But for people who didn't catch your previous background on previous shows, can you give people a little bit about your story of how you got here? And I got a million questions about what's coming in the future.
Yeah, Jess, I'm super excited about this series, the quality of the people we're going to be able to get, and I think give the listener and viewer an extraordinary opportunity to take a look inside this industry to begin to get very, very comfortable of how big it's going to be, and that they should be comfortable investing in it, because it will be a tragedy to miss it with what's about to happen. So I come from medical. I'm a medical doctor. I did emergency medicine, for those of you across the Atlantic, or A&E. And then from there, and I began to do entrepreneurial ventures as the founder, financier, individual involved in a number of companies. I had the good fortune of working with extraordinary people. So the companies have gone through $28 billion in market cap, bringing the number 1 drug in the world for prostate cancer, number 1 drug in its class for migraine, and really excited about the fact that 343 of the employees of those 2 companies are millionaires or multimillionaires now. The founders of those companies have made over $1.8 billion. The institutions we worked with, specifically universities, have taken home $1.6 billion. So it was a model where everybody got treated very fairly, which is really important to me. And then in 2017, along with 2 partners, Declan Dugan, former head of drug development at Pfizer, and Jim Mellon, a polymath who wrote a book on anti-aging, we started a company called Juvenescence to try and slow, halt, or reverse aging. I was the CEO for the first years. I stepped down last January 2023. And so, yeah, that's me in brief.
So maybe digging in on that just for a minute. So were you an ER doctor in Toronto? I knew it was Canada, but I never asked.
I actually was 100 miles north of Toronto, in a small community. At the time, it did fit me well because you were the only one in the hospital, so you got to see everything, as opposed to big city hospital where they're amazing, but it's a lot of triage. I get to deliver babies and deal with car accidents and sprained ankles and everything in between. So it was a fantastic decade, 10 years.
Yeah. And then, these companies that have grown and, sold both of them to Pfizer and obviously still have things. How much was raised that turned into the 28 billion in market cap?
Yeah. First company, somebody hasn't asked me that. So if I'm off on the numbers, the first company, probably 300 million. The second company, that was Medivation, and it's the prostate cancer one, because we got very fortunate with our Alzheimer's trial, and so we got $220 million from Pfizer as an upfront fee on I'm working with them. And then when we did the prostate cancer, we got another 100 million. So we didn't have to do a lot of huge capital raises. Biohaven did not take on partnerships, so it's probably all forms of financing, grant,
Just
royalties.
equity. Just equity investors.
Probably just under 2 billion, 1.5 billion. But that's when they're public, where you really want to get in if you're comfortable. And what hopefully will convince you with this series of podcasts is when they're still private.
Yeah. So combined, kind of somewhere in that 1.8 to 2.2 or 2.3 billion in equity between
the 2 companies. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Okay. So let's be pessimistic. Let's call it 2.3 billion to 28 billion. I think that's
not
pretty exciting for some
more
people.
Importantly, and why people should begin to look early. Had you invested $1.55 in Medivation, that was, so let's say your net worth for easy math was $15,500. So you invest $155 in Medivation. You would have 12 years later, sold your shares if you kept them the whole time. And obviously very few people did, but you would have sold them for $32,400. So your net would have gone from 15,000 to 47,000. Biohaven in 8 years, if you'd done the first round, you would have invested at 60 cents, so $600. If your net worth was 6,000, you would have put up $60, and you would have gotten $14,000 back, so $20,800 for your $60 investment. So when it works, it is extraordinary, and happy we've had the good fortune of doing that a couple of times now. And I think the metrics are even larger for the area of longevity. And, Jess and I will go through that shortly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the series here. Longevity for investors. As we came up with this together, you had the great idea that it would be both how can investors live longer? The kind of people who might be interested in a show like this. What can we do for our own health practices, and then also how can we invest in longevity and help make it so people can live 10 years longer or more. Can you talk about why this is such a passion for you?
When we got the positive results on the cancer drug, the CEO promptly phoned me because it was early in the morning in San Francisco, and I was probably the only one awake, and I was a board member, so we could share it without consequence. And he said, we changed the world. For probably 20 million people whose brother, father, uncle, grandfather, lover would have died in 6 months, now we're giving them 4 years extra, on a curve, but, so some people are getting 10 years extra, and you realize how profound that effect is, that carries on with that. So the migraine, unfortunately, is about 10% of the population. So America, 36 million people, and they lose days. Some of them lose weeks. I mean, it's a horrible condition, which totally can compromise your life depending on the frequency of the migraine. So, and then again, it ruins a whole family's life. Mom keeps getting migraines. We can't go on a trip. We can't organize anything. So it's profound when it works. And now think in the context of aging. Right now, we have the biggest economic time bomb. Eclipsed 2008, probably eclipses COVID as well, in that we do not have enough young people to support the elderly. So there is the system, it doesn't work. And unfortunately, the time between when you are healthy and when you die is a gap of 10 years where you're a complete drain on your family and society. Wouldn't it be great if we could narrow that to 1 day, 1 week, 1 hour? That's extraordinary. I just gave you back 10 extra years of healthy living. So I give you an extra day of the week. And additionally, you now have people who can still function in society and give something back, as far as whether it's working in a charity or it's continuing to do hopefully a career they like. So this is powerful if it does it. And by the way, if you increase how long people live healthy, you're probably going to increase longevity simultaneously. So, and then you change the world, and it's 10 years now. It'll soon be, that we can give you 20 years and so on. Still got to sort out Alzheimer's, because nobody wants to live to 150 if you had Alzheimer's for the last 60 years of your life, or you're in a wheelchair. But these are the things that people in this sector are working on. And the rewards will be extraordinary for anyone who begins to sort this out.
Yeah, when we were becoming friends, that 10 years number was really important to me, because my hero in life was my mom's dad, my grandpa Bridge. We lived 4 doors down from him in our little farm town in Western Canada. And he, like every one of his 60 grandkids thought they were his special grandkid. They were all delusional. It was obviously me. But I remember when he did pass away, a couple of days before he passed away, we had this great conversation. He said, many ways you've been more like a son than a grandson. It was, really
Wow.
special. But 10 years before that, he was going in for quadruple bypass surgery. And I was, in my teenage years, and I really relied on him in so many ways. And I was just praying. I was praying so hard. God, please let my grandpa live, right?
Yeah.
And that medical breakthrough gave me an extra 10 years, and he got to see a couple of my children born, and
Wow.
these things.
Wow.
Uh, and those are high impact years for me, with, next to my parents, for sure the most influential person in my life, and so it resonated so much for me, of like, wow, what if the work you're doing, or these things that hopefully I get to be part of someday, um, give somebody else give someone else their grandpa bridge for that 10 years that matters. And so that resonated so much with me.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a very powerful story because people don't think about these things in that context, and imagine for the other grandchildren who erroneously thought they were the special one, and for his children, not only his grandchildren, how he got to continue. So yeah, and for him being able to see your grandchildren. So it's a bilateral, bonus. So yeah, and so it's incredibly powerful, and so it's definitely a passion. And the other big thing about it is, in creating these products, you are changing healthcare from a current model, sick care. Hopefully, you have a cure, maybe a treatment, to prevention, so you don't even get sick. And the economics of that are staggering. So yeah, it's going to be very rewarding for the investor. It's going to be very rewarding for the investor who sees the positive outcome. Which I had a really special moment being an early investor in Medivation of prostate cancer, meeting one of our survivors. I mean, definitely brings a tear to your eye when you meet somebody who should have been dead 4 years earlier and is not only not dead, they're in perfect health. You know, wow. And his wife is crying. So you realize what you've done.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Um, well, so we're going to split these episodes into half investing advice and half health and longevity advice. Starting on the investing side, there's so many folks who maybe they've done well, they're high net worth, and they've got the means to become a limited partner in a fund, or they've got the chance to get into some sort of longevity investment. But it can feel like a black box, or it can feel scary. And we all know the horror stories of, think of the classic book, George Caslin's The Greatest, Richest Man in Babylon. For anybody who remembers that one, where it's like the mentor is talking to the guy, the shield maker, and he's like, why did you give your money to your buddy to go buy gems from the Phoenicians? They just sold you a bunch of glass because it wasn't in your buddy's circle of competence to know the difference between buddies and glass. Like, why hadn't you put more money into metal and buy some more shields? You could have made money doing that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so you hear this advice like, Warren Buffett says risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. And, they say when they come across something outside their circle of competence, they wait until they find something else that's inside their circle of competence. And so, so many of us are we feel uncertain when people start dropping all these medical acronyms and even just how the FDA process works. There's so many things to confuse or to make people feel insecure. And so I guess my question is, when you think about those of us who, didn't start our career with 10 years as a doctor and haven't spent the decades in the world that you have, when it comes to somebody like me wanting to select who should I have faith in to help me navigate where to place my bets across this portfolio, what's some advice you have for someone who's serious about investing in longevity, but also serious about it not feeling so much like gambling?
Great question. And I get it all the time. I'm not an MD, I'm not a PhD, I can't invest. Warren Buffett invested in BYD, the electronics, the EV company. I'm sure he did a masterful job, him and his team, of analyzing everything. I can guarantee you that Warren Buffett probably can't build the car. So what he did was he looked and he said, great management team, adequately capitalized, interesting product. Those metrics are the same, whether it's a Tesla or investing in ChatGPT that I know no one, precious few can write the code for that, and yet they invest. So what do you want? You want to see a very hot sector, interesting sector. You want to make multiple bets because you don't know which one's going to win. And you want to pick a great management team. Jess, you might be too young, but in 1998, if I'd said, let's invest in search engines. But we don't know which one's going to win. So we'll invest in Alta. We're going to invest in Yahoo. We'll invest in this other one called Google. And let's see, and Alta Vista. So, yeah, two of them went to the toilet. One of them did okay. And one of them would have made you an extraordinary amount of money. This is exactly the same situation. It's an odds game. So why have I had the good fortune of having one company sold for $14.3 billion to Pfizer and another one selling a drug to Pfizer for $11.8 billion? Because it was a portfolio. We had a great management team. We had a great management team of innovation. We have a great manager, David Hung, hopefully will be on the show. Vlad Koric at Biohaven, hopefully be on the show. So we will interview them and say, begin to break out what is the quality that you should be looking for in that person. And that's a very exciting area that Jess and I are going to discuss. So great management team, in this case, drug developers, expertise, adequately capitalized to get through an inflection point. They don't have to get to selling the drug because you can sell it to Pfizer. You can do a venture after you prove it works. Halfway through the clinical trial, when you have zero revenue for another 3 years and still get $200 or $300 million, plus 50% of the profit, plus 700 million in milestones if things begin to work out. So you've done extraordinarily well, considering at that point you probably invested $30 million to get to that level where you could have all these metrics. So just like any other business, great management team, exciting product. Longevity is amazing. And the reason you want to get involved is because the first longevity drugs are on the market today. Many of you may have heard of them. They were originally created for type 2 diabetes. They're called the GLP-1s. You may know them as Ozempic, semaglutide, Wegovy, Mounjaro. But basically, not only do they treat diabetes, they decrease your weight by 15 to 22%. That change in weight dramatically lowers your chance of cardiovascular disease, neurological disease, metabolic syndrome. They will live longer because they decrease disease. So that's amazing. What do they think the market's going to be? The range is $75 to $150 billion a year in revenue. So if you do and biotech usually gets better than a 10 to 1 market cap, that company is immediately worth more than over $1 trillion. There'll be multiple companies. But the point is that amount of wealth was created, with not huge, like the disproportionate return for the amount of money you put in. So that's what you look for: the great management team, look for the portfolio, and I would suggest do it on the one manager. The assets they have to be non-correlated. So I don't want to see 10 drugs, but they're all based on the same pathway. But if you can do those sort of things, the chance of success for those is probably, if they get them after phase 1, going to phase 2, probably 33%. It's 33% to make 15 times to 30 times your money. Jess, we had the good fortune of crossing paths at the Formula One in Vegas. How long would you play at a table in Vegas? If one out of every 3 hands, you won 15 to 30 times your money. But you can't play just once because then you have a 66% chance of losing. So the metrics here are spectacular. And it's not that hard to make an extraordinary amount of money, even if your circle of confidence is that you are able to assess the management team and you think that they have a robust path. Been there, done that, and understand what they're doing. It's particularly regulatory and IP.
Yeah. So let's talk about this team aspect. There are so many people that today could rattle off some statistic about their previous track record, and they did this, and I'd be very impressed, and could come to the conclusion, oh man, they must be one of the superstars in the industry. And then I call you and you're like, oh no, I actually know the guys over there. He was like, he got brought on late. He got that, he got that C-level job. He did not build this. He didn't come up with the pathway, and so context matters. You've introduced me to a couple of your friends in Hollywood, right? And I mean, there's a world that is famous for losing people's money, has high net worth investors, and is famous for people, like, oh yeah, I just made the new Leonardo DiCaprio movie, or I'm a producer on the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, and it's like, yeah, but there's producers who bought the credit, there's line producers who showed up, there's the producers who are like the PGA mark producers who are like the CEO of the movie, there's the co-producers, which is like a junior producer, and Hollywood is famous for people giving you the impression they were like a PGA mark producer who got the money together for Leonardo DiCaprio movie. Then they got, I don't know, David Fincher to direct it. And they were there on set every day for 3 years. And they were like the quarterback of this movie, right? Actually coming together. And they made that movie. They like to give you the impression they were that PGA mark. And it's like, oh no, they're one of the investors who bought a producer credit. So like, great management team to me is such an interesting thing as an outsider, to be able to evaluate, to be able to reference check, to be able to understand the difference between people who talk a good game versus people who play a good game, right? Like,
Yep.
as you're talking, I keep thinking like, this is like Billy Bean in Moneyball, the Michael Lewis book, or the Brad Pitt movie, where
Brad
it's like,
Pitt.
you need somebody who knows how to evaluate the players and who's going to get the base hits, right? And so like, who is this like, how do I really get confident that this GM of the baseball team actually knows what players to pick to win this ball game? And that's a very long run into my question, which is, what are some red flags? As somebody is considering the kind of portfolio manager who's going to help them diversify and spread their risk, what should be some red flags of somebody who, yeah, the resume sounds good, but...
Yeah. So it's always good to follow a great lead. So if you see one of the biotech mafia, I call them, the people who, exclusively do biotech and they're invested and there's a good mix, that's an exciting metric. And a lot of people count on that before they'll invest money. I want to see a lead. I want to see somebody who's done great due diligence, who knows how to do diligence. And so you can do that. The other ways it is that the CEO and management team don't have any of their own money in it. You can look at the board of directors, and you want to see, again, people who are great asset value and know that sector really well. Would you invest in a software company if you saw Bill Gates on the board of director and heard he invested? Yeah, probably. He's a smart guy, he knows the sector. So, it isn't just the management team, it's also the people around them. So, dead easy in biotech to get Nobel Prize winners and on your SAB and maybe even board of directors, because they worked their whole life on one thing. They got their Nobel Prize. They haven't necessarily made an extraordinary amount of money. What you want to see is true value add investors, the people like who've done it, been there, and they're investing and they're into it. And that credibility stamp of approval is really, really important. So if you don't see that, by the way, if you see a past president of the United States, if you see the Secretary of State on the board of directors, if you see a famous general, unless it is a defense industry company or one that needs contacts internationally, run for the hills. There's been 2 or 3 incidents of companies that had that sort of board of directors. These people know nothing about that industry. They're there for show. So I don't want to see, George Bush on the board of directors. I want to see, somebody who's been in biotech, has extensive experience and has invested some of their own money. So those are really big no-go things for me.
Yeah. So for complete newbies to the sector who they've come to this revelation, oh yeah, baby boomers are the first generation that's basically like refused to get old. And they're willing to spend whatever it takes to not get old. Right?
Yeah.
I don't need a crystal ball to realize there's going to be some money here, right? And they don't know who the biotech mafia is. What are the publications we should be reading? What are the websites we should be reading? How do we learn who, like, are there leaderboards we can check from Bloomberg? Like, how do we find out who the real high credibility biotech investors are in the world?
You can A, ask them how much money they've got under management. B, how many investments they've made. Some mild amount of diligence. If they've just closed a round, and their rounds are getting more and more money is coming into them. Three funds raised $14 billion last year. The biotech mafia, because they have such an extraordinary track record historically. So that's really helpful. You can look at other deals that were done in a similar company. So you're investing in a cardiovascular company and you see the last two IPOs of other cardiovascular companies. Who are the investors in that? And you can usually find that out. And so you can see what they're doing and and then they're obviously incredibly knowledgeable of the sector. So there are all those the significant ways to do it. Um, yeah, diligence on not only the management but the board of directors, and also if they have any investors that have come in earlier than you, how to do. The other thing that I do, and what people don't understand about biotech is you and I could invest in an enterprise software for payroll and think, wow, this is really good. Nobody's doing it. And there could be some kid in a garage in Wisconsin who's going to blow us out of the water. That doesn't happen in biotech, because it do have the laboratory facilities and all the facilities to create a drug and a product that is not around the corner. The other thing is everybody has to register with the FDA. So I know exactly when a new drug is coming. And because of that, it infants. So I'm never going to get sideswiped by somebody with a drug that's 3 months behind me, because they've registered clinical trials at FDA with the FDA. So I know the competitive landscape, which is again a huge thing, and something you need to understand is competitive landscape. Ideally, you want to invest in a drug that services an unmet clinical need, and that and that the management team can explain the mechanism of action. This will work on anti-aging because it attacks this cell pathway. Everybody knows that cell pathway is important, and this drug works on it. And we'll
Yeah.
hear about that from the people we're going to have on, exactly how they thought about it, how they picked the products they picked.
Um, so for people who don't have a $20,000 a year subscription to PitchBook, what are the publications that are respected in the investment industry for biotech and future healthcare?
The big ones are the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet. They'll be highly complicated for an individual to read. It's easy to read the abstract, which is just the first paragraph at the beginning. We did 20 patients. This is the pathway, and we've seen this. And then if it's seriously something you're then going to look at, read the conclusion. We've seen this. We think this pathway is incredibly validated. It still needs to be validated further, or we are feeling comfortable basic on all the other things we've seen. So you can you can read that if you're looking at a specific product or sector. By the way, Google's fantastic. There's a pathway called mTOR, that is probably one of the main pathways in anti-aging. In fact, it's the only drug we know that and mammals has demonstrated equality for anti-aging is one called rapamycin that works on mTOR. In fact, mTOR is called, it's an acronym for mammalian target of rapamycin. So the drug literally defined the pathway. So you can put mTOR scholarly articles into Google and it will tell you, all the articles. And if there's lots of articles, great. If you want to look at the most important one, it tells you how many other people have cited it as as something that's their most important thing to their research article. So if you see one that's got enormous, backing from other parties, and have been cited a lot of times, that's probably an important article.
Okay. What about more on the finance side? Like, are there like, hey, these are the top 5 investment banking firms for biotech, or here's here's the venture capital news for biotech. This is where the industry players. We don't read that on CNN Business. We read about it on such and such website for venture, or where else can people start to learn?
So JP Morgan has probably the premier conference on healthcare that's in San Francisco every January. So because of that, they're one of the major players. And then it's the usual suspects. Goldman Sachs has a great franchise. And Citibank has said that modifying aging is going to be one of the top 10 most disruptive technologies of this decade. And so they've got a great analyst, which attracts great companies. Bank of America says that this is going to be a $500 billion industry in the next 2 years. So that's how fast it's going to grow. And that will create companies worth, if it's 500 billion, that'll create companies worth minimum $5-10 billion in market cap. So that's how important it is to invest in a balanced portfolio. And then all the banks are UBS, they're all acutely aware that this is a monster industry. They're way ahead of investors on how important this sector is going to be. And it's just starting. Longevity is where generated AI was 3 years ago. It's where you could have invested in OpenAI for not a lot of money if you had access to it. So that's the opportunity. And so, yeah, and then it's to try and, as you say, you can pick a fund that you think is bona fide. Lots of longevity funds are starting up. And, then you're trying to get groups that you think have credibility to deploy the capital.
Yeah, that's great. What's another thought for, maybe this is just a high net worth individual who wants to put in some money, or maybe it's a family office that is thinking about placing, very, very serious dollars. What's some other advice for the first time investors into longevity?
Don't be in a rush. I don't think, you have to deploy all your capital now. I tell investors, to put 1% of your net worth into these sort of ventures is, not much, particularly these days that you can get a bond for like 4 or 5%. So just take 20% of what you're making a year off the bond and put it into biotech's not crazy. And if it's right, like Biohaven and Medivation will literally double or triple your net worth in, 10 to 12 years. So I think that, take your time to try and find the right people, look for the right constitution of board members and whatnot. I think that there's, hopefully, we'll see more of a democracy in opportunities. But right now is a great time because the biotech industry has really suffered because too many companies went public before just after COVID and before COVID, with what's called SPAC, special purpose vehicles. And so they've taken a beating. So people are scrambling for money. So you can actually see some pretty great deals at reasonable prices now. And then, as I said, if you put your money in, make sure they're adequate. There's enough money. You don't want to be 1 million when they really need 20, or $20,000 of a financing where they're undercapitalized too, because they have to get through that next phase, whether it's phase 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, because that's where you see the pop.
And to just give people a range who just have no context for that, what are the kind of numbers that should sound reasonable when they're saying, "Oh no, we've got this much," or we're going to be able to get this much to get through something like that? What are the minimums? What are the kind of the ranges that people should be wanting to hear?
Most of them, when they're going to be asking for money, have priced out the clinical trial. So 2 to 5 million generally for a phase 1 clinical trial. So we have the 5 million and we have $1 million afterwards. You can see these are our employees. We'll be able to cover our employees while we seek to raise the next tranche of money based on a successful clinical trial. Phase 2, again, it can be anywhere from $50 to $30 million they're going to need for that. So again, you want to see that they have that amount of money, and they probably have a little bit more staff now, so $2 or $3 million. But overhead is not big because most things are outsourced. So you want to see those sort of numbers per trial. So in the case of Biohaven or Juvenescence, our anti-aging drug, we have 5 products heading towards the clinic. So you want to see that we can do all 5. They're in phase 1 clinical trial. So you want to see at least five times $5 million that they're raising over 25 million, so they have more runway. So about $30 million because the overhead, as I said, is not crazy. So anybody with some modest thing can do it. And you should, ask them, pressure test, and you want to make sure that they've not underscored the financing and as far as the clinical trial. This is where it's really important that you see somebody like I had with Vlad and David, respectively, at Biohaven and Medivation as CEOs. They'd run lots of clinical trials. They knew exactly how much it was going to cost. So I was very comfortable when they said, we're going to be able to run this trial for $20 million. Here's our costing. And so, that's the thing that you do need to ask.
Okay.
Or you join a limited partnership where the person at the top knows what questions to ask and has had a successful track record. Track record's enormous. That's why I was able to raise, so with my partners, the amount of money we've raised for Juvenescence.
Yeah. Let's switch gears then. Let's talk about people take your advice and they take it slow and they invest with the people with the right track record who are capitalized properly, that can actually articulate the pathway how this is going to work. And when you explain that pathway to somebody else from the industry who doesn't have a financial interest, it doesn't sound crazy to them, right? And so all of a sudden they've got a bunch more money and they want to live longer to enjoy it. So let's talk about personal health for investors listening today. And why don't we start with a first tip you've got for ourselves in living healthier longer?
So the number one thing right now in my mind that you can do as far as lifestyle, and that is fitness. If Walter Bortz at Stanford said, if you're fit, you mentally and physically decline at 0.5% a year, starting about 25, 30, 2% a year for unfit. That's a heck of a delta. And if as you age, depending on your age, and you look at your contemporaries, you can rapidly tell who's in shape and who's not in shape. So being in good fitness, this isn't crazy extreme fitness. I'm not talking cross fitness, or being able to run a marathon. In fact, actually, the research sort of shows that that's a negative because for whatever reason, they die younger than their contemporaries who are just fit and not running marathons or riding 100-mile bike rides. And that's not to downplay the other, two that are huge in sleep and nutrition, but fitness probably is a larger one if I had to pick one. And then supplements and drugs are probably fourth.
So we didn't plan this out, and I don't think I've ever told you this. When I was at a consulting firm before starting my own, I had the Surgeon General of the Army as a client. $52 billion budget, 175,000 staff. And wow. I remember asking her what it was. And she called it the white space. She said, our soldiers, we only see them like once in a while. What about all the time between those visits? That's where health is happening. She called it the white space. And that was her thing, was sleep, exercise, and nutrition. And it just sounds so basic. How could it be true, right? And obviously supplements and these things, as you said, for number 4. But I remember at first being so underwhelmed, right? I was like, what?
That's it?
This is the
pearls coming down from the top of the mountain?
This is the answer. And yet, you think about how much common wisdom is not followed, right?
Look at smoking.
And yeah, right? You look at the rationalization, especially for ambitious people. If you're a serious investor, there's a good chance you're a decently ambitious person, right? Or if you have enough money, maybe you're not a serious investor, but you did something else, so you have enough money to become an investor. You were probably ambitious. That's how you did what you did and went through all the heartache and the hard things and did the things other people weren't willing to do. And that's how you have enough money to be an investor, right? Our ability to rationalize short-circuiting our personal health for some big goal, it knows no bounds. 900 and something episodes of my innovation and leadership podcast, all these people build billion-dollar businesses and pro athletes and stuff. That ability to work through any pain and these kind of things and have long-term vision and sacrifice things up front. And, I have billion-dollar founders on the show say, hey, listen, I say, how's life changed now that you sold your company for I had a guy on Monday. He sold his company for 2.6 billion. Right? How's life changed? And it changed a lot. He's like, well, first I climbed Money Mountain, and then I kind of got what I was looking for. So then I was like, now what? And all of a sudden, like family things and other things that he'd rationalized not spending time on, he was changing his life around. Right?
Moved up the ladder.
But I hear these billion-dollar founders say to me, well, like obviously when you're going flat out building your business, like your health, like things like your personal health or your eating may not be what you want them to be, and like at some point you've got to get a hold of that. And it's like, well, I identify with that. Like I unfortunately have
Yeah.
been that guy too many times in my life. So when you think about just those basics, which are going to be so underwhelming for somebody looking for the magic secret, when you think about actually getting ourselves to do what we know we should do you have any tips?
Yeah. I mean, it's so easy to get distracted, right? Whether it's you're on a good diet, you go to visit a friend and they have pizza, and one piece of pizza. Um, or there's a great event that you want to go to. So, well, I'll try and catch up on sleep on the weekend. And going to exercise is just a problem. I think the big issue, and I'm talking to a number of parties about actually starting a longevity clinic, and not one where it's the top 0.1% paying me $50,000 a year. This would be for the masses. And so much is education. And then the other big problem, once you've educated people, and they still tend to ignore you because, as you said, most people know it's sleep, exercise, nutrition, um, and fitness, or exercise, fitness. It's the element of making it sustainable. So I can tell you, you should go to the gym 3 to 5 times a week, and you should do a mix of exercise. It's absolutely right. Some high intensity, not every day, once every 3 or 4 days, maybe 4. You should mix in some endurance. You should do a little bit of yoga or Pilates, and you should do some weight training. And even men or women, you should do that for osteoporosis and for just general strength. It's really important to do it. 90% of people are not going to do that. They don't have the time, to your point with the billionaires, but most people, period. You have a young family, you don't have the time. So what we have to do is to say, Jess, what do you enjoy doing? Because you may hate the gym, or you may hate yoga, and how can we fit that into your life? So the interesting thing with high intensity training, where it's literally 10 minutes, most people can fit that into their life. So now it's just, again, getting a program. Some people enjoy bike rides, gardening. Like it doesn't have to be something extraordinary. So that's the thing you got to do. And similarly with diet, it's great for me to tell you no sugar, no complex sugar, only eat fruits, vegetables, and you can have fish and chicken and that's it, or vegetarian, even better. But to actually, if you're traveling, to try and incorporate a vegetarian diet that's healthy is really tricky. So sustainability is a big, big problem for people. So it's great if you are fortunate enough to, acknowledge that. And when you're reading these things, say, okay, I'm not going to do what Peter Attia says with this amount of exercise. It's not my, but as Peter says, I will try to fit some exercise in 3 times a week. Also, I won't
But
sit all day long.
by the way, I bought that book. Will you tell people why you told me that's the first book I needed to read?
Here's one of the reasons I'm doing this. I don't know, Peter, if you're watching, thank you, or listening. We met at the Milken conference very, very briefly, but he was part of 4 people I met, and I went, this is something here. We're going to be able to find drugs to do this. So what Peter does is I believe he's an elite athlete, and he may still be. And so he began to test all the things he was reading scientifically on himself. So he was using himself as a lab rat. There's another guy named Brian Johnson who's doing the same thing. And so, but Peter's probably not quite as extreme as Brian. So he would test them out, and he was doing it methodically. And then he has a podcast where he has the best of the best scientists. So Matt Kaberlin, who ran the Dog Aging Project and is leading guy, because I mentioned that pathway mTOR and rapamycin. Matt's one of the experts in the world on that. He had Matthew Walker, who has written a very, very good book on sleep. So I had him on, what do we need to think about? How do we change the quality of our sleep? So, and he began to incorporate that into his practice as a physician and into that. And he wrote a book, which consolidates a lot of what he's learned. So you're getting a guy who spent last 10 years, I don't know if it's more, maybe 15 years, talking to the top people, using it on himself, seeing what works, and you get that knowledge distilled into a book called Outlive. And hats off to him. I think it's a great book.
Yeah. And I forgot to ask this earlier. What's rapamycin?
Rapamycin is a fantastic drug. You heard, obviously, during the show that Jess is Canadian. I'm Canadian as well. And it's not just Canadians working in this sector, I should mention. A scientist was looking for, I believe, new antibiotics. And so he thought he might find it in soil samples. So he went around the world picking soil samples. And he found one. And he wasn't able to bring it back to Canada because he was Canadian. And I think he smuggled in, on this story goes, in an ice cream. So he was able to keep the spores alive by putting the ice cream, and nobody checked his ice cream. And he got it back. And lo and behold, it's not an antibiotic, but it works on it's a drug to depress your immune system. But what they discovered was it seems to also have a dramatic effect on slowing aging. And they saw a huge effect in the dog aging project that Matt ran at Washington University. It's University of Washington, I should say. And so there's this drug that now some of the official, it's expensive, unfortunately, that, a lot of the top scientists and people in this and biohackers, people who are serious about, are taking this drug called rapamycin. And it's part of this 4 pathways in cells that change how you process energy and how your cell ages, AMPK, mTOR, NAD, and sirtuins. And to the point where this drug that this guy found, literally it caused us to name it. It's called the mammalian target of rapamycin. So that drug works on that pathway. And for those of you who love a good conspiracy, the soil sample was taken from underneath the statues at Easter Island that gave us the anti-aging drug.
Wow. So, as you were talking, there's a couple. Yes. I'm glad the aliens can help us live longer. As you're talking, a couple of thoughts occurred to me. I'm so with you on education. I remember at my event in LA in December when you spoke, you brought up that daily flossing will likely make you live 4 years longer. And it just, I don't know, like it clicked. And like, I think about that all the time when I floss. And then I think about the contagiousness. Seriously though, because it's like, oh, I brush my teeth. I really need to floss. And it's like, I keep hearing your words in my ear, right? I'm like, oh, well, it's worth 4 years. Okay. I can take a couple more minutes, right? But I also think about when I'm brushing my teeth, my teenagers are usually coming in and out of the bathroom, or my wife or whatever. And the osmosis factor of setting an example is something like, so my kids are 19, 17, 15, and 12. And the whole like, your kids aren't going to do what you say, but they are going to do what you do. Like, I have really seen that, right?
That's brilliant.
Like going to the gym, for instance, like I haven't set the example there. Like I go do my, high intensity, like dirt biking, mountain biking, skateboarding, snowboarding, that kind of stuff. And they definitely caught the bug for that. But like my 17-year-old son and my 15-year-old daughter are the ones setting the example for me on the going to the gym. And there's like this osmosis factor. I look at like, I decided I was done with sugar cereals a few years ago. And so like, I have no carb breakfasts. And I wasn't trying to push it on anybody in the family. And like the osmosis over the last handful of years, like my 12-year-old is the only one who still eats cereal in the morning. And like the whole rest of the the whole rest of the
Families
family,
change.
like this osmosis factor. So like for me, that connection of the like, it's not just about me, has actually helped me with that like, oh, I don't feel like it factor. So the education and the connection factor have been a couple for me.
It's and unfortunately, it works the opposite way. Mom and dad smoke. A friend of mine, I was in his office and his wife phoned and said, I found marijuana in your son's sock drawer. You have to have a talk with him. My friend is a very sweet guy. He's really bad at confrontation. He goes, oh, honey, you know how bad I am at that? She said, come on, you got to step up here. And he goes, okay, I'll do it. So the phone rings 5 minutes later and it's his son. And his son said, I know what mom said. Just so you know, you have no credibility on this issue. I know you and mom smoke marijuana, and hung up.
Wow.
Just so you know. So yes, the good behaviors and the bad behaviors will be picked up by those around you. And yeah, education. I think I told you on a previous show, but to reiterate, west side of Glasgow and east side of Glasgow. West side of Glasgow has money. East side of Glasgow is the poorer side of Glasgow. And we were with the top epidemiologist at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. He said, the people in the West, they live to men to 78, women to 81, which is pretty much the same across most developed worlds, plus or minus 2 years. He said, you want to guess what it is for the east side of Glasgow? Jess, did we do this together earlier?
Yeah, but I don't remember the answer.
Oh, okay. Do you want to guess?
I want to say it was something like the men were living into their like 50s or something, 60s. Like drastically
57,
less.
50,
Yeah.
54, a 27-year delta, which is 50%. 50% of 54 is 27 years. And it's all education because in the UK, you have access to healthcare. So it's not like don't have a doctor when they deliver their baby and that skews the results. This is literally eating the wrong stuff, not working out, smoking, bad nutrition. I mean, like it's just so specific. So yeah, education's a monster, which is part of the reason that you and I conceived this idea of this show is, how do we pass this along? Um, we'll give you another delta on how to live longer healthy. So there's a blood test that your doctor can do called homocysteine. And they say that normal is anything under 11, but really you want to be under 9. If you're under 9, you lower your chance of dementia by 30%. So how do I get it under 9 if it's over 9? It's really easy. It's fish oil that has omega-3 and DHA, which you buy on Amazon for like 50 cents a day. I don't know what the price is. And methylated B vitamins. And you can get one by, by Thorne, which is called Methyl Guard, which is methylated B vitamins. And it's that easy to potentially lower my risk of dementia with incredibly safe products. So that's a real powerful one, and that's part of what we hope to pass on.
What's that test called again?
Homocysteine, HOMOCYST, and I'm always read with my I before E and E before I, but IENE or EINE,
And
homocysteine.
I can just go ask my doctor, hey, can we do this in my next blood test?
Yeah, I mean, probably should be doing it anyway, but that's a sidebar.
um, okay, tell people about blueberries and bananas. This one
Yeah,
got
that
laughs
was a
last time.
shocker. So we have to, repeat any study we talk about. Jess and I, needs to be repeated. You just can't trust the first trial. The number of false positives because the person working the trial wanted a positive trial is quite high. But fundamentally, lots of people love blueberries and bananas or berries and bananas. And what this person found out, and it actually makes sense scientifically, is that if you put bananas with berries, the banana destroys 84% of the nutrients, the flavonols from the blueberries and berries, which is really important because we happen to know that blueberries potentially have a protective effect for neurodegeneration, blueberry skin specifically. And Stephen Haggerty, I think, was working on that at Harvard. So the very thing that I'm taking, thinking I'm getting all this great benefits, I'm actually negating it. And the element that destroys the flavanol, we believe, is the same thing that causes a banana to turn brown. So That's why it makes a lot of sense. So it still needs to be repeated, but nonetheless, it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, that shakes a lot of people up because so many people do the berries and banana.
So in my if I'm doing my smoothie, what do I do with my berries instead of if I want the creaminess, but I'm not going to put my frozen banana? What do you recommend?
I'm sorry, that's above my pay grade.
Like
I
a Greek
generally,
yogurt or
you know
something,
what,
or what?
yogurt, add yogurt. Um, ideally, kefir yogurt's probably better than other yogurt, but yeah, it will give you the creaminess you're looking for, Jess. And bring in the berries. And if you throw in nuts, um, the yogurt and the nuts, I believe, give you all the essential amino acids you need when you're doing protein absorption. Where dairy is missing one or two, and a lot of nuts are missing one or two.
Yeah.
But nutrition aid
Um,
might have expertise. So, with any of you that are nutritionists and listening in, please feel free to email Jess.
Great. Um, something that I want to bring back up about the example thing, and I didn't get this out, but I was meant to bring it before, is this idea of the example being contagious, both positive or negative, is from F1 when it was later in the evening and somebody was saying, "Oh, where's Greg?" And some of your other friends said, like, "Oh, he's got a flight," and they're like, "Yeah, Greg is serious about getting his sleep. Like when he's headed back that other side of the ocean, like he's like he will go to bed at whatever time he needs to." And the fact that all your friends knew that meant that this wasn't the first time, you know.
No,
Um,
it's
so let's
my
talk
secret
about
to jet lag.
sleep discipline.
Yeah, I mean I have a very active business life, and so I can't afford to go to Europe and like lose 2 or 3 days or be slightly out of it. And if I haven't slept well, I'm definitely not functioning at the same level. So yeah, it's really important. And it sounds crazy, but you know, so I missed 2 hours of the F1 practice
Yeah.
thing, because I went to bed a little early and I gradually started cheating. But yeah, I definitely don't have issues with disciplining myself. Similarly with eating, other than sweets. I love my sweets, so that's where I'm compromised.
um, when we when you think about the role of education there for sleep, and I get that so often facts don't make the difference, but sometimes they do, right? Sometimes education makes the difference, and I think that education and example are like education, example, and connection. There's an incredible book called Change or Die by Alan Deutschman. I don't know if you know this one, but he was a journalist for GQ magazine, and he really ballooned up and was just very, very obese to the point where like his editors who cared about him paid him to do a story with like world class trainer, and they fed him every meal and he did the workouts and whatever, and they turned it into a piece. And like
Wow,
he was interviewing Will Smith, and Will Smith offered him like a whole bunch of money to lose a certain amount of money, like a lot of money, and he's like, it was just like this yo-yo and it never worked and whatever. Anyways, so this book Change or Die is about like how do you actually get people to change? So it's people who come from heart surgeries, people who get out of jail, like all sorts of different areas. But specifically for his weight loss, it was like by picking a trainer who was also Jewish like him from his same neighborhood in New York, who didn't look like Mr. Olympia, which he never thought he could get to. And they just connected, and they had a connection, and he could relate to her, and she helped him, deliver on his good intentions. And it was this major lifestyle change when Will Smith paying tons of money or his editors paying to do whatever for him couldn't. But so education wise, one of the big ones for me on sleep was there's this book called Essentialism, and they talked about this study, and I don't even know if this study is real, but it worked on me. Okay, where they said like if you look at like the highest income earners, the highest performance people financially, um, of those first four, it's like the lowest level get the most amount of sleep, then the next level up get less, then the level threes get less, Then the level 4s get even less, and then the level 5s get even more than the level 1s. And he talked about these practices of the highest performers and protecting their sleep and making up for sleep deprivation on weekends and like, really committing to 7-8 hours plus. And I changed my life.
Well,
And I just said, like, I have my big goals in life, and I just realized that I had been rational. Like I was like somewhere between that level 3 or level 4, and so it was almost like like the slightly competitive part of me, like, oh no, I can be like the high performers. I can start actually going to bed, and it actually, there was another case that education actually worked on me.
it was interesting when I was practicing medicine. I'll have to add connection to it. I used to say these patients would come in and they'd ask questions. And I say, you need three things to change. One, you have to think there's a problem. Two, you have to have a reason to change. And three, you have to know how to change. And when you look at people who can't change because they're doing a aberrant behavior, or want to lose weight like Alan did, or something like that, do they have those three things? And but connection makes sense. Although I would potentially argue that's part of knowing how to change. He needed to have somebody who understood him to that he could accept that as how to change. But yeah, no, people definitely struggle, and it's a significant issue given the three easiest things in the world. You know, health to do it is exercise, nutrition, and sleep. And then you can throw in. By the way, for those of you who are hearing about the dental floss, I will both acknowledge that point and argue against it. It's really important. The bacteria in your mouth is really problematic for causing potentially Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So there's a valid reason to do it. But also, the type of person who flosses every day, every night, is probably doing other things. And the study, I'm not sure, eliminated that bias. But regardless, stick with it because it's powerful as far as changing the microbiome that's already pretty susceptible to causing disease.
Um, let's say maybe I'll just spend a minute, and maybe we can address this more over the series with your different friends and these people we're going to get to interview. Um, when it comes to supplements specifically, but also drugs, with drugs, oftentimes there's just too much knowledge, and maybe our local doctor doesn't know as much as could be
Oh,
helpful.
it's so tough for
And
them.
and supplements is, it's just such a wild west of all the, look at all the TikTok and Instagram ads that people get fed, and think about all the, you know, the news stories that get debunked later, and it can just be so confusing. When you think about um, people who want to take their supplements and drugs more seriously, um, how would you advise them to become more educated and take more control over feeling confident in their choices there?
An enormous start. And Peter, I Want a Royalty is Peter Attia's book. I think the lovely thing about him is that he will change his mind. It's my biggest issue with what happened in COVID. People won't admit they made mistakes, based on the knowledge they had at the time. So I don't blame them for doing what they did, but then subsequently say, yeah, I was wrong. But that's the information I had. Peter will say this subsequent information has come out and you shouldn't take this product, or you need to take it at a different dose. We were wrong. So what I would say is there's powerful books like that of people who, in his case, spends every waking moment of his business life, sort of sussing these things out. The other one is because I get it all the time, should I take alpha ketoglutarate? And I'll go online and I'll put in alpha ketoglutarate scholarly articles, and I'll see, how robust is the research in that area? Are people talking about it, saying it, and again, I just read the abstract. We did a study, it was 100 patients, and we noticed it changed X, Y, Z. Then there's things that go back and forth because so many of the products that are very good for you have a not only have a benefit, but they also have a negative element associated with them. And intermittent fasting is a very topical issue, which hopefully we will cover in future podcasts. And the issue, it had an enormous number of positives, and then there was a negative article on it. Not, and so you have to appreciate that, there's a bunch of metrics that they're going to change in your body, and some are positive, some are not. Alfalfa sprouts, very good for you, but they have a pretty good cancer causing agent in it as well. But the benefits, the other elements are positive enough to outweigh that. So a mixed blessing, but yeah, that be somebody knowledgeable who really, is doing it themselves and is knowledgeable, and B, if it's something de novo that your friend has recommended, go online and check it out and see if there's any research on it.
I love it. Well, what do you want to end with today?
Good question, Jess. How long do you want to live, Jess?
I don't know. I would like to shoot for like, this probably sounds silly, but like at least 110, 120 plus.
How long would you like to live if you were healthy?
Probably even longer.
How long would you like to live if you had the anatomy and physiology of when you were 25 or 30? And
Yeah,
you could
probably
keep
a real
that.
long time.
I think, and that's important, I think, to finish on, because that's what we're talking about, is this potential to regenerate a knee if you hurt it snowboarding or dirt biking. And Bezos and Sergey Milner just put a $500 million each into the ability to regenerate the body. So the money is beginning to come in. There is opportunities, and that's what we're talking about. And then we go back to your grandfather and pleasure he would have had to see even more of what happened with his grandchildren, and your pleasure and your children's pleasure in interacting with him. So it's an amazing thing. So I think that's a good note. How long do you want to live? Those three metrics. And anyone listening to this, you can ask yourself and your friends that question.
This is great. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye now.